Hey y'all, hey, welcome back to another episode of Truth, Trust, and Trajectory with your girl Shaquem B. Y'all already know what it is. Where healing meets transformation. If this is your first time, welcome back home. If you're returning, you already know this space is where we strip off shame, rewrite the story, and we also reclaim our power. Today's episode is deeply personal to me. It's raw and it's absolutely necessary. We're diving into something I like to call the dark angel, the man who did not come to love me, but instead he came to wound me into purpose. So, this episode is for every woman who's mistaken a trauma bond for a true connection. Every one of you who stayed too long, kept trying to prove your worth, and forgot who you were in the process. I'll be sharing real experiences including the emotional and spiritual toll my relationship took on me, and how I finally woke up. I'm also going to add a trigger warning. We're going to be touching on emotional abuse, gaslighting, narcissistic patterns, trauma recovery, and emotional flashbacks. If you need to pause and return, please make sure you do that. Also, please make sure you guys subscribe to this podcast and share this with someone that is still stuck in the cycle. And make sure you guys visit my website. Let me put it up here for you. ShakemB.com for my trauma recovery workbooks. I also have a healing reset funnel and exclusive content inside of the Rebirth room on Patreon. All right. So let's get into it. Let me paint this picture for you guys. When I first met him, it literally felt like divine timing. The way that he looked at me, the intensity in his voice, and the way he called me beautiful in a room full of chaos. I thought that I had finally manifested my soulmate. Now, initially, I didn't feel like that. I was very cautious, right? Because something inside of me was kind of setting off alarms and bells when he first came into my aura. And in fact, I actually saw him way before I met him in the physical. And I couldn't put my finger quite on what it was that I was feeling with him, the apprehension and kind of the need to take things slower as opposed to, experiences I've had prior to him. But I do remember feeling like he had been sent to give me all of the things that I was asking for. In fact, I remember him always saying a king will always realize or recognize his queen before the queen does. And I thought he was full of complete shit when he used to say that, right? But here's the thing that I learned from the whole entire situation. Not every answered prayer is from God. What I noticed very early on with him was that he had a unhealthy attachment to me from the jump. I used to tell myself, he just loves hard. But in reality, it was control disguised as care. And I grew to love it. Not because it was healthy, right? But because it felt familiar. When we first started talking, we weren't actually dating initially, right? I remember he used to always be around me. I talked about this in one of my previous videos of how he showed up at a very pivotal time in my life where I had just got out of one relationship and I knew that I needed to take my time. I didn't want to rush or jump back into anything. I didn't want to start to activate my anxious attachment style and my codependency to this person, right? And so I remember always talking about this with him and letting him know, like, ultimately I feel like you came at the wrong time because it would be unfair to you if I were to say I can commit right now just because I know you would be a rebound. At the time, I was still in love with my ex, right? And I hadn't really mastered the art of letting him go. And I don't even think that I wanted to. In my mind, I felt like I was still holding space for him, right? In case he decided to come back. And the thing about the last relationship that I ended was that, he was so consistent and persistent that we were meant to be together. And so I remember one night we were talking, this is like in the very, very beginning phase. It was probably like maybe a month into us talking to each other. And I told him, I said, you have deep seated mommy issues, and I'm going to disappoint you only because I can already tell that you have an unspoken expectation of me. So you expect me to show up in a way that your mom failed to show up for you. And at the time, he seemed really receptive, but also like he kind of like rejected that ideology or that notion that I could see something that he was unable to see, right? Nevertheless, we continued on, and the more time that I spent around him, the more attached I became to him, right? Even though I knew that this wasn't the person that I was supposed to spend my time with, or this wasn't my long term person, right? This was not my forever person. He showed up to teach me something, and he did, right? And so in that moment, I think that I ignored my first red flag, and that is ultimately what made me stay, right? Because he was so good at talking. And he made me feel like everything that he was saying was truthful and it was valid, right? And I began to question myself in this connection. But ultimately, what I learned is that he didn't actually love me. What he was very good at doing was latching onto my wounds. And I let him because I still didn't really actually learn how to love myself without having pain being attached. So there's a difference between healing and performing healing. And I think with this previous experience, I was absolutely performing. After our first big fallout, I remember talking to a friend, and initially, like, I pretended like I was fine, right? But when I was talking to my friend, and I forgot what it was, I think like he had took a lot of because he used to follow me on social media, so he would follow my TikTok, and he was also subscribed to my YouTube channel. And I remember like we used to have conversations about, the role that women play in their own demise. And he seemed to be so receptive, like he completely understood. But I think our first argument, our first fallout, I was just so taken aback because he pretty much took everything that he made seem like he understood about me initially and tried to throw it back in my face. And looking back, I don't think that I was cognitive about what I was actually getting myself into initially, right? And how detrimental that first argument was, and how I should have taken heed to it, but I didn't, right? Instead, what I did was I smiled through, I filtered it. I would post like a motivational quote just to show that I wasn't really triggered. But behind the screen, I was literally pissed, like I was drowning. I thought that if I looked happy on the outside, it would become real. But every single time after that, I stayed after being belittled and disrespected by him. I lost a piece of myself, right? And I feel like it speaks volumes to just where I was at mentally in that situation, and not really. I mean, I knew that it was off, I knew that it was wrong, and I knew it from the beginning, but I didn't put in the work or the effort, right? Because it was easier to just stay with a person or continue to deal with somebody knowing, even still, that they're really not that good for you, right? And I remember, like, after that first initial argument and me really seeing his mask drop and how disappointed and frustrated I was, and like, doing my tarot readings and just kind of like, trying to find a reason or excuse to stay connected to him, right? And I felt that if I performed strength long enough, that maybe I would eventually become it. But real strength is walking away even when your body wants to stay. Now, it took me almost a year, right, to learn that. But eventually I learned it. Like I practiced and I built up towards that. But initially, like, that's not what it was. It was literally, and I talked about this in, just no labels, just vibes with my sister about how, with dealing with someone like that, that might have like a manipulative narcissistic personality, right? With him, I felt like every time I took him back and, decided to see the best in him instead of looking at the bad, every time that we came back into union, he had found a way to ultimately one up the last level of disrespect, right? And you end up teaching people how to treat you based on this. So that is a huge takeaway. So I want to talk about cognitive dissonance, but also knowing staying. I knew that he wasn't my person the night that he flipped my own truth back on me. I had just shared how I thought we were too toxic together and that we should consider ending it before it got worse. And I remember the next day, he actually used those same exact words against me. He told me that I was only good for sex. He said that I was ugly and basically that nobody else would want me, right? His thing was consistency. And I talked about this again in one of my last videos. If you guys make sure you subscribe, you guys can find access to the video, or maybe I'll like link it somewhere up here, right? But in dealing with him, I just remember like not saying the mean things that I wanted to say, right? But just only speaking the truth, because I do feel like it's important, right, to remain objectional regardless of how bad you want to kind of like go low, right? But I didn't realize that he was so manipulative until I realized that he started taking like things that I would say or do and try to use them back on me, right? And I think a level of that had to do with the way that he felt attacked from my truth, because it was obsolete to what his end goal was, right? If a person is only dealing with you to kind of benefit themselves, if you say something that goes against their core belief, they're going to get offended. They're going to get mad, right? And so like when that happened, when he took the exact same words, and I remember like a couple of days prior, my sister and I were recording an episode, and he was so triggered about it, even though it had nothing to do with him. I think that, it goes back to that saying, like, somewhere this shoe is always fitting on someone's crusty ass foot, right? I think that a part of him internalized whatever it was that I was talking about with my sister as it pertains to her past relationship or her marriage, right? And instead of him looking at it from just a objective standpoint, he started to internalize it, then feeling like, I was throwing shade or talking about him when in fact it had nothing to do with him, right? Collectively, women go through so many different types of abuse, a lot of it at their own volition, right? A lot of people don't want to admit that, but I can, right? A lot of the things that I've been through were simply because I was being hard-headed. I didn't want to listen to my own inner voice. I didn't trust that I could make good decisions, right? And so it was easier for me to trust somebody else's words, ignore their actions, and then cry because, their actions and words don't align. So, with all of that being said, even after that, like, I still considered staying with him. And one of the main reasons is because when you're trauma bonded, the cycle becomes the comfort. I was ultimately afraid of isolation more than I was afraid of the disrespect. Why? Because you get accustomed to it, the disrespect, and it becomes almost like a safe haven. It's predictable. You know that, after you get done dealing with this person, right? You might block them for a couple of days and then unblock them, and then you guys are right back to square one. It's like a continuous restart button. And that's what I got with him, right? Until I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. I think one of my lowest moments with dealing with my previous partner was the night we had got into an argument, right? And one of his favorite things to do used to be kind of like triangulating me with white women. He would say things like, "Oh, after I'm done dealing with you, I'm never gonna deal with another you black bitches." That's what he used to say, right? He's like, "You guys just want men to support your life. You want men to fund your life. You don't even like men." And I used to be like so confused as to where he was getting this perception, because in my mind, I'm like, if I didn't like men, why would I be accepting all of this low vibrational treatment and behavior from you? If I didn't like men, why would I continue to take you back after you've disrespected me in so many different ways? If I didn't like men, why the fuck are you here? Why would I be taking my resources to make sure that you're okay if I didn't like men? Right? But it makes sense because it wasn't that I didn't like men, it was I didn't like myself. And I think that was the thing. He needed to be able to establish that chaos and confusion in my mind so that way I wouldn't look at his behavior. If I was so fixated on my flaws and my shortcomings, I wouldn't pay attention to what he was doing, right? I wouldn't have the strength or the energy to point these things out. But I remember, there was a time where we had just come off of a break, and I had invited him over. At the time I was in school and I was working, just trying to get my shit together, right? And I remember he used to like always try to like distract me from my schoolwork. I was doing hybrid school at the time, so I was on the computer, and he would like try to show me stuff on his phone and just kind of like anything to take my attention away from what it was that I was supposed to be doing. And I remember one night I got frustrated with him, and I let him know like, "Hey, you're kind of being a distraction right now, right?" And he got really upset. He got pissed off, and that turned into an argument. So I think we didn't speak for like almost a day. And then the next time he came back over, he had actually showed up at my job with two roses because he knew that roses and sunflowers are my favorite flower. And so he came with, two flowers, and he sat in the waiting room at my job all day. And, we were on the phone, and I could hear people, in the back, like giving him praises. They're like, "Oh, you bought someone flowers." So he would do things so that it looked good from the outside. And I had went outside I was taking my lunch break. He gave me the flowers, and women were kind of like pandering to that. They were like, "Oh, that's so sweet." And in my mind, I'm just thinking like, if only you knew. This is literally breadcrumbing. It was breadcrumbing. And I knew it, but I didn't dare speak out against it on him because he would get so frustrated and mad. Like he would feel like I was disrespecting him and I was ungrateful for calling out what I saw, right? And so that day while we were on lunch break, he had pretty much essentially wanted to bare his soul to me and let me know all of the things he had lied to me about. And I remember feeling this feeling of, I wouldn't say it was relief, but it was more like I kind of, things that he was telling me I already knew, right? And so I was like, it's about time. But then there were some things, because I guess he decided like I'm gonna do different. Like I want to show you something different. So I'm gonna start being honest with you now. But the thing is, he would selectively be honest. So it was like a controlled truth. So that way he can control the way that I perceived him. Because if he was only able to tell me certain truths, right? then he could be like, hey, like you said you wanted an honest guy. I'm honest. And you're still not happy. It's a game. And I remember later on that day, he had came back and, he was like, we're going to have, I'm going to order food and we can, have a picnic outside at the park. And then it went from that to, oh, I'm going to order groceries. Like, what do you want us to cook? And so, mind you, it's like probably 3:30, 4 o'clock at this time. And so I told him, I was like, I'll cook burrito tacos, just order the food. And so he had like went in my bathroom and was like super secretive and quiet and stuff like that. And he's like, yeah, my grandmother's going to order food. Now I'm like, in the past, you've sent me the money and I've ordered the food. But now you're kind of like doing something a little peculiar, which sets off, alarms in my mind. Because I'm like, why are you being so sneaky about it? It just didn't make any sense at the time. So 4 o'clock comes and then 6 o'clock comes. I start my class and now I'm a little bit irritated because he's still in my space. You told me you were going to do something. It still hasn't happened, right? And then 6 o'clock turns into 9 o'clock. There's still no groceries there. He's giving me this bullshit story about how his grandmother didn't know how to order the groceries, so he had to have his cousin do it. And he's texting somebody the whole time. But what he used to do was he used to do voice to text, so that way it could come across as transparent, which is another form of manipulation and gaslighting. Because, I've got stories for days when it comes to that. And so I remember around 10 o'clock, I'm like, listen, my class is over. I'm ready for bed. I'm also annoyed because I'm hungry, you know. And he's like, well, I ordered groceries. They're on the way. Okay, but you said that like 5 hours ago. And he got so frustrated and mad. So I asked him, I was like, let me see the text message between you and your cousin. Because you said that she ordered the groceries. So all I'm asking is just to see it and confirm it. Mind you, he showed me text messages between him and his mom and his brother before. So I'm like, how come when I ask you for this thing, you're like, oh, it's not your business. That's between me and my family. But I'm like, you've showed me text messages between you and your family plenty of times before, and it's never been a problem. So now I'm asking to see this particular message, and it's a problem. And he pretty much just lost his shit, got mad and stuff like that. As we're arguing, a car pulls up and the groceries come. At this moment, I'm like, I don't personally, like, I don't even want them anymore because now I feel like you're doing something sneaky. Like, in my mind, I felt like he asked another woman, maybe like a side chick, for money. She ordered the groceries. And then, he basically tried to pit it off as it was his cousin, which was weird. And at that moment, when that argument happened, I knew like this is not even going to go well. Like this is not my person, right? So with this, you cannot logic your way out of a trauma bond. Your brain literally has to remember what your body already knows. And that is to say, this is not love. So leaving him did not feel like freedom. It literally felt like a withdrawal. Like I was detoxing from an emotional drug that I had convinced myself that I needed. And he wasn't gone. He literally still lingered in text messages, voice notes, and memories. And in all of my quiet moments, I missed the cycle, not the person. So after I finally decided that, what we were doing wasn't going to work, that he was going to continue being this ungrateful, hurtful, manipulative, toxic individual. The first day that I had went without speaking to him literally felt like liberation. It felt amazing, right? I was literally on cloud nine. I mean, I thought about him, but it wasn't like excessive. I remember going to the store and coming back home, and it's like my body felt him energetically. So as I'm turning the corner, I saw him walking down my street. And I would like go off into kind of like an anxiety attack because my body always keeps the score, right? And after I think I saw him for like 2 or 3 days in a row, he would just kind of be on my street trying to make friends with my neighbors, talking to them, just so he kind of like had an eye on me. And then he disappeared for a couple of days. And when I didn't see him, that's when I really started feeling the emotional effects of his presence no longer being around. Not because I missed him, but my brain was confused because of the toxic cycle that I had continued to stay in with this person. And so, I literally would be like outside looking for him, not like wandering around looking, but I would be outside like, oh, maybe he's going to walk down the street. Then I started wondering like, hey, is he safe? Is he safe? But one of the things that, is so important when you're going through the ending of a cycle such as this, that doesn't matter, right? And I'm not saying like be cold-hearted and be a bitch about it, but it's the fact that your brain literally is used to a pattern. We get stuck in these patterns with these people, and with the patterns comes repetition, right? So you're so used to doing this with this person, your brain, once stop partaking in the pattern with this person, it feels like a death, right? You're like anxious and you're scared and you're worried. You're wondering if the person's okay, if they're safe. Then you start wondering, what they're doing. Not that you really care, but it's just like this was your person at one time, right? But one of the things that I realized is that emotion is temporary, right? It's what you choose to do with that emotion, how you choose to proceed with that emotion. That is what truly matters. So after, it was like a culmination of relief, regret, and guilt, all tied into one. And sometimes the hardest part is not letting the person go. It is actually facing the version of yourself that let them stay, that allowed you to stay stuck in this pattern, right? So I want to talk about facts because this is more than just emotion. This is your nervous system and your brain chemistry. Oxytocin is what bonded me to him through intimacy. Dopamine highs from his apologies that he gave and to the false hopes. The oh, just give me time. You can't expect things to happen overnight. When in fact I gave him almost a year and he wasted almost a year of my time, right? But it wasn't his fault. He did what I allowed him to do. He simply did what he was supposed to do. He was there so I could learn boundaries, self love, and self preservation. CPTSD is a chemical that keeps you in a loop of phoning, apologizing, and trying to fix, right? Gaslighting is what made me doubt my reality until I no longer trusted myself. And if you have not yet read The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Basil Van Der Kolk, please do. Now, we are nearing the end of this episode, so I just want to change directions real quick, and I want to do a short breathing exercise together. So you guys are going to inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and then you're going to ground and remind your body that you are not in danger anymore. Y'all ready? Let's do this. When my body used to respond during arguments, the longer I was with my last person, some of the things that I would notice was that my stomach, I would have like a ball or a knot in my stomach, right? My chest would literally tighten, my heart rate would go up, my voice would shake, or sometimes I just wasn't really able to speak at all. These are literally trauma cues, right? And I was just talking to a friend and my sister the other day about what it feels like to be safe, right? And to finally be able to trust myself and put myself in situations and predicaments that do allow me to feel safe. I had an instance, a situation, and I talked about this in one of my previous episodes, the night or the day that this man tried to take my life. And this is not to, say he's a terrible person. I think that he's fighting things, right, that don't have anything to do with me. Sometimes you just end up being collateral damage for another person if you allow yourself to. But the day that he tried to take my life, I remember, after finally being able to get him out of my house, um, the level of anxiety and fear that I experienced after. And so for almost a year, I would lock my bedroom door because I was so scared that he was going to try to, break into my house and try to do it again and to harm me. And it's been about 4 nights now where I've been, training myself and practicing feeling safe in my own space, in my own skin, in my own mind, just feeling safe to where I don't lock my door anymore. And I feel like for me, that's a win, right? We never realize the severity or the depth and level of trauma we experience from some of these relationships and people that we encounter until after it's all said and done, right? When you have to start healing and making yourself better, right? And establishing trust within yourself after the person is no longer a part of your reality. And for me, it feels like a huge win because I walk around my house now not feeling like I'm on edge or feeling afraid. I can go to sleep at night and not feel like I'm missing something or that I'm afraid. So when I think about him now, I feel gratitude, right? Because had I not gone through this experience with this person, I wouldn't have this level of adoration for myself and a higher level of respect because I know what I don't want, right? So now once you can establish the things that you don't want, you should be able to pinpoint exactly what you want. And when you know what you want, you know what you won't put up with. And, sitting in in isolation or solitude is not difficult anymore because I can look back to a time when I was dealing with this person and everything was so traumatic and chaotic. And I refuse to allow myself to go through this process, right? This transmutation, this alchemic process of sitting alone because it's not a punishment. It's literally preparation. And so when I say I thank him, I don't thank him for what he did, right? But I have love for him because of what he forced me to become. And I know that wasn't his intention, right? But it was the byproduct of him not loving me. Then I had to love myself. And looking and saying and seeing that I had to rebuild from ashes. And knowing that I had to choose myself even when I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. I had to reparent myself and reclaim my joy and rewrite what love actually means. I created the Rebirth room for women just like me, and I did this months ago. You guys can find it on Patreon. The link is in my bio, right? And it's for women who are tired of surviving and you're actually ready to heal. A lot of us say that we want to heal and we literally just perform the act of healing, but we don't actually do it, right? We don't actually do it. And I've been there before, saying that I'm healing, but I'm looking for somebody else. Now, I'm not saying walk around being afraid and, nervous about what you'll encounter after, right? But allow yourself some time and space to sit with yourself, to learn you. That is what the rebirth realm is about. I used to think that he was sent to love me, but now I know that he was sent to break the illusion that I wasn't already whole. I thought I was, but I wasn't. So I want to close this episode together. I want you guys to inhale. I am no longer performing, and exhale. I am already enough. And I give you guys some affirmations. I forgive myself for not knowing what I didn't know. I forgive myself for thinking that pain was proof of love. I choose myself and I come home to me. All right. If this episode spoke to your soul, don't you even think about keeping it to yourself. I want you guys to screenshot this episode, tag me on Threads or Instagram at Shaquem B, and subscribe to this show. And if you're ready to go deeper, please make sure you guys go over to my website, download your free workbook at shakemb.com, and join me inside of the Rebirth room for group healing. I also have trauma coaching and emotional rebirth. This is Shaquem B with Truth, Trust, and Trajectory, where healing meets transformation, not transportation. You were never broken. You were just surviving. Now it is time to rise. Until next time, y'all. Okay, bye.